Under the dim light, he saw Eve, his wife, and with her, a man, someone Emeka recognized as a fellow tenant, Ugo, a quiet man who lived a few doors down. His stomach sank as he saw Eve's body pressed against his. The sight of them in the car, locked in a passionate embrace, was enough to make Emeka's chest tighten with pain. His wife was cheating on him again. In the bustling city of Lagos, Chijioke lived what seemed like a perfect life. He was successful, had a beautiful house in Lake area, and was married to Adaora, a woman he believed was the epitome of loyalty. She was soft-spoken, kind, and carried herself with the dignity of a queen. But Chijioke had a weakness: women. Despite his perfect life, he couldn't resist the urge to chase after other women. He convinced himself that it didn't matter. Adaora didn't know, and even if she did, she would never cheat on him. She was too loyal, too different. One evening, while Chijioke was having drinks at a bar, he ran into an old university friend, Emeka. They hadn't seen each other in years and immediately reconnected, laughing and reminiscing about old times. "I'm in Lagos for a business trip," Emeka said. "But I'll only be here for a few days. I'm staying at the hotel in Ikeja." "Hotel? Why spend money on that when you can stay at my house?" Chijioke offered proudly. "Are you sure? I don't want to be a bother," Emeka replied. "Bother, my brother, my house is your house. And my wife Adaora will be happy to have you. She's the best wife in the world. Faithful, respectful, God-fearing, everything a man could want." Emeka smiled. "If you say so, I'll stay." "Thank you, Chijioke." They finalized the arrangement, and the next evening, Emeka arrived at Chijioke's house. Chijioke led Emeka into the house, boasting the entire time. "You'll love it here, Emeka. Adaora is not like other women. You know these Lagos women, always chasing money and looking for rich men to sponsor them. My wife is different. She's loyal to the core." As they entered the living room, Chijioke called out, "Adaora, we're home." There was no response. Chijioke frowned but quickly smiled at Emeka. "She must be resting upstairs. Let me go and check on her." "Make yourself comfortable." Emeka nodded, taking a seat on the couch. Chijioke climbed the stairs, heading to the bedroom. As he got closer, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open and froze. On their bed, Adaora was with another man. The man scrambled to cover himself while Adaora sat up in shock, her face pale. "Chijioke," she began, her voice shaking. Chijioke didn't say a word. He backed out of the room and quietly shut the door. His heart pounded in his chest and his mind raced. He felt humiliated, betrayed, and angry. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, and walked back downstairs. Emeka was still in the living room, sipping a drink. Chijioke, where is your wife?" Emeka asked casually.
"She's
upstairs," Chijioke said, forcing a smile. "She's not feeling well, so she's resting. Let's give her some space." Emeka nodded, unaware of what had just happened. Chijioke sat down, his hands trembling.
He couldn't let Emeka know what he had just seen.
But his mind was already plotting his next move. Chijioke sat in the living room with Emeka, trying to keep his composure. His heart raced and his mind was clouded with anger, but he forced himself to appear calm. "Chijioke, are you okay?" "You look distracted," Emeka asked, glancing at him. Chijioke forced a smile. "I'm fine, my brother. Just tired. You know how Lagos stress is." Emeka nodded sympathetically. "I understand. You work too hard. Rest is important." Chijioke nodded absent-mindedly, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Upstairs, his wife and the strange man were still in his bedroom. The humiliation and rage were almost unbearable, but he knew he couldn't let them slip away quietly. No, he had to deal with this. "Emeka, please make yourself at home. Let me go and check something quickly," Chijioke said, standing up. He went to the kitchen, his mind racing with ideas. He grabbed the key to the bedroom and quietly returned upstairs. Standing in front of the door, he heard muffled whispers. Without saying a word, he opened the door slightly, just enough to meet Adaora's frightened eyes. "Chijioke, she began. "Don't talk," he said coldly. He stepped inside, glaring at both of them. The man looked ready to bolt, but Chijioke raised a hand. "You're not going anywhere," Chijioke said in a low, dangerous voice. He reached for the door, stepped outside, and locked it from the outside. The click of the lock sent a shiver through the room.
"Chijioke, you can't lock us in here!"
Adaora shouted, rushing to the door. "Watch me," he said through the door. "Both of you stay there until I decide what to do with you." Chijioke stood at the foot of the stairs, his mind racing. He had locked the bedroom door, but now he had to act quickly. He needed to control the situation. especially with Emeka sitting downstairs, completely unaware of what was happening upstairs. He took a deep breath, pushed open the bedroom door, and stepped inside. Adaora looked up at him, fear in her eyes. The man still sitting on the bed looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. "You both are coming downstairs," Chijioke said, his voice cold. "And you will greet my friend like nothing happened. Understand?" Adaora opened her mouth to speak, but Chijioke raised a hand. "No more talking. Do as I say." Adaora nodded reluctantly, standing up and grabbing the man's arm. They followed Chijioke downstairs, where Emeka was sitting on the couch, casually flipping through a magazine. Chijioke entered the living room first, followed by Adaora and the man. Emeka looked up, and his face lit up with a warm smile. "Emeka, meet my wife's elder brother," Chijioke said, his tone smooth and steady. "This is Nnamdi, Adora's elder brother, who just got into town." Emeka stood up, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you, Nnamdi," he said, smiling. Nnamdi shook Emeka's hand, looking uneasy, but going along with Chijioke's plan. "And this," Chijioke continued, gesturing to Adaora, "is my beautiful wife, Adaora. You've heard so much about her, right?" Emeka smiled warmly at Adaora. "Nice to meet you, Adaora." She forced a smile, but remained silent, her eyes glancing nervously at Chijioke. "Please make yourselves comfortable," Chijioke said, his tone masking the fury inside him. "Let's have a drink, relax, and enjoy the evening." Emeka, oblivious to the tension, took a seat on the couch and chatted casually with Nnamdi, who was clearly uncomfortable but didn't dare speak. Adaora sat next to Chijioke, her hands trembling in her lap. As the evening wore on, the tension in the room became unbearable. Emeka was still laughing and chatting with Nnamdi, while Chijioke quietly observed, his mind racing. He had locked Adaora and Nnamdi in the room earlier, but now he needed to ensure the situation didn't escalate further. Nnamdi, clearly uncomfortable, shifted in his seat and glanced at his watch. "I think it's getting late," he said, his voice a little too casual. "I should be going." Chijioke's eyes narrowed, and he quickly responded, No, Nnamdi, you're not leaving." Nnamdi looked at him in surprise. "But You'll stay the night." "Of course," Chijioke interrupted, a smile spreading across his face, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Emeka's here, and it's not right for you to go at this hour. The roads are unsafe." Nnamdi hesitated, then glanced at Adaora, who looked down at her lap, not saying a word. "Stay for dinner at least," Chijioke insisted, his voice firm. "Adaora will fix something for us." Reluctantly, Nnamdi nodded, sitting back down. Chijioke turned to Adaora. "Make sure dinner is ready, Adaora." "We have guests?" Adaora nodded silently and went to the kitchen. The tension at the dinner table was thick. Emeka continued to chat, blissfully unaware of the undercurrent of deceit, while Chijioke sat in silence, his thoughts a whirlwind. He barely tasted the food that Adaora had prepared, but he made sure to smile and maintain a calm appearance. Adaora, for her part, said little, her eyes darting nervously between Chijioke and Nnamdi. Nnamdi, who had tried to make a quick exit earlier, now seemed resigned to the situation, his shoulders tense and his eyes avoiding Chijioke's gaze. Dinner passed in a haze, the awkward silence broken only by Emeka's laughter and light conversation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Chijioke stood up. "It's been a long day," he said, his voice steady. "I think it's time for everyone to retire. Nnamdi, you'll need to rest in the guest room." Nnamdi nodded and stood, but Chijioke stopped him before he could leave the room. No, not just yet," Chijioke said, his smile never faltering. "I need you both to come with me. We'll be having another little chat." Adaora's eyes widened and her breath hitched in her chest. Nnamdi looked like he wanted to protest but was too afraid to speak. Chijioke led them back upstairs, his pace slow and deliberate. As he reached the bedroom, he looked at them both and said, "Now, I don't want anyone leaving this room until I say so." "Understood?" They nodded silently. Chijioke turned the key in the lock, sealing them in once more. He stood for a moment, staring at the door, then turned and walked back downstairs, his mind consumed with dark thoughts. Chijioke sat in the living room, the house quiet around him. He could still hear the faint sounds of the air conditioner in the guest room where Emeka was sleeping. His mind was a whirlwind of anger, hurt, and confusion. He couldn't let this go. He needed to speak to someone. He quietly got up and walked to the guest room. He opened the door slowly, making sure not to wake Emeka just yet. Emeka was lying on the bed, snoring lightly. Chijioke stood there for a moment, staring at his old friend before gently waking him up. "Emeka," he whispered. Emeka stirred and opened his eyes. Chijioke, what's wrong? Is everything okay? Chijioke sat on the edge of the bed, his head hanging low. No, everything is not okay. Emeka sat up, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost. Chijioke sighed deeply. He couldn't hold it in anymore. It's Adaora. She's been cheating on me. Emeka blinked in shock.
What?
Chijioke nodded, his voice shaky. I found her. In our bed. With another man. Emeka was silent for a moment, trying to process what he had just heard. But I thought you said she was faithful. You always spoke so highly of her. I know. I was wrong, Chijioke said bitterly. I thought she was the perfect wife, but she's been hiding this from me. Emeka's eyes narrowed. So what are you going to do? Just let her get away with it? Chijioke's fists clenched. I can't. I don't know what to do. I locked her and the man in the room. I don't want them to leave until I figure this out. Emeka paused for a moment, his face turning serious. You know, Chijioke, if I were in your shoes, I would end this once and for all. You can't let them get away with it. You have to make her feel the pain she's made you feel. Chijioke looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Kill them both, Emeka said coldly, his voice low. If she betrayed you like this, she doesn't deserve to live. The man too. He has no respect for you. Chijioke's heart was beating hard. The words hit him hard, but deep down, he could feel the anger pushing him toward that thought. He had been betrayed. His pride was wounded. Maybe Emeka was right. You really think I should do that? Chijioke asked, his voice trembling. Emeka nodded firmly. Yes, if she really cared, she wouldn't have done this. You have to make her pay. Make them both pay for what they've done to you. He looked at Emeka, who was still sitting up in bed, watching him closely. You really think this is the only way? Chijioke asked again, his voice low and filled with doubt. Emeka nodded. I'm telling you, Chijioke, there's no other way. You can't let them live after what they've done to you. If you let them go, you'll always wonder. And you'll never have peace. I can't just kill them, Chijioke whispered, shaking his head. That's too far, Emeka, even for me. Emeka leaned forward, his voice lower, more urgent. You've already gone this far. Don't back down now. If you kill them, you can start fresh. You can be free of this pain. You can take control of your life again. Chijioke stood up slowly, his thoughts racing. But then, a voice inside him whispered, How will you feel if they walk free? Will you ever forgive them? Chijioke walked back into the living room, the decision weighing heavily on his shoulders. He had heard Emeka's advice, and now the plan was set in his mind. There was no turning back. He quietly walked to the kitchen and grabbed the knife from the counter. It felt heavy in his hand, almost unreal. This was his life now. The man who had it all. About to lose it forever because of a single betrayal. Chijioke climbed the stairs slowly, his heart racing. He couldn't help but feel like he was making the biggest mistake of his life. He stood outside the locked bedroom door. Inside, Adaora and Namdi were talking in hushed voices. Chijioke could hear them, but it didn't matter now. It was too late for words. He had made up his mind. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door and pushed it open. Adaora and Namdi froze, their eyes wide with fear. Chijioke stood in the doorway, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was quiet except for the sound of Adaora and Namdi's heavy breathing. They had been caught, and they both knew it. Adaora's face went pale when she saw the knife in Chijioke's hand. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but no words came out. Namdi, too, looked like he had seen a ghost. He scrambled off the bed, his body trembling, but he didn't move toward the door. What? What do you think you're doing, Chijioke? Adaora asked, her voice shaky. Put that down. Chijioke's eyes never left her. His mind was made up. This was the only way to take control. He couldn't let them get away with it. Both of you, Chijioke's voice broke, the weight of his pain making his words come out slow and heavy. You betrayed me. You took everything from me. Adaora took a step forward, her eyes full of tears. Chijioke, please, listen. No, he cut her off sharply. I've listened enough. You knew what you were doing. You wanted me to feel the pain I've caused you for all these years. Well, now I'm feeling it, and now you're going to feel it too.
You are enjoying the story. Please subscribe. I am Tamel Deebs. And let's get back to the story.
Namdi's voice faltered as he spoke. Mr. Chijioke, I'm sorry. Please don't do this. I never wanted to hurt you. But Chijioke wasn't listening. His hands were shaking, but the anger kept him moving forward. The pain was unbearable, and this was the only way he could see to make it stop. I trusted you, Adaora, he whispered, his eyes filled with anger. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me? Adaora's tears streamed down her face. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I wanted you to understand, to know how it feels when you betray someone. The words hit Chijioke like a slap. His heart dropped in his chest as he processed what she had said. What, you planned this? You did this on purpose? Adaora nodded slowly, her voice barely audible. Yes, I knew how you were. I knew you were cheating on me all this time. I just wanted you to feel the hurt, the way I've felt. Chijioke stood there stunned. The knife in his hand felt heavier than ever. He had thought they were simply two people who had betrayed him, but now he understood. She had done it to make him understand her pain. For a moment, everything stood still. Chijioke was paralyzed, not knowing what to do. He had come here to end it, to take revenge for the betrayal. But now everything was different. The anger in his chest began to dissolve into something else, something he didn't expect. Why didn't you just talk to me? Chijioke asked quietly, his grip on the knife loosening. Why didn't you tell me how you felt? Adaora sobbed, shaking her head. I didn't know how. I didn't know how to get through to you. You were always with other women, always distant. I just wanted you to understand, Chijioke. Nnamdi, still standing near the bed, looked at Chijioke, his face filled with guilt and fear. Chijioke, I swear I never meant to hurt you. It was wrong, and I regret it. Chijioke stood there, the knife still in his hand. His anger was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of confusion. How could things have gotten so out of hand? Chijioke took a deep breath and slowly lowered the knife. His heart was still racing, but the fire of revenge had faded. What good would killing them do? Would it make him feel better? Would it change anything? You both need to leave, Chijioke said quietly, his voice trembling. Get out of my house now. Adaora and Nnamdi didn't argue. They both knew it was over. Adaora looked at Chijioke, her eyes filled with sorrow, and Nnamdi quickly turned to leave. As they walked past him, Adaora stopped for a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. I never stopped loving you, Chijioke. I just didn't know how to fix it. Chijioke didn't respond. He just watched them leave, the weight of everything crashing down on him. After they left, Chijioke stood in the middle of the room, staring at the empty space where they had just been. He had been so focused on his anger, on revenge, that he had almost destroyed himself. But now he had a choice to move forward, to learn from his mistakes and to start afresh. The third night, after Emeka had confronted Chijioke, the tension in the house was unbearable. Chijioke had spent the day thinking about everything that had happened, trying to come to terms with his feelings. He knew he couldn't keep running from his problems, but he wasn't sure how to face them either. Emeka, on the other hand, had been quiet for most of the day. He didn't want to add more pressure to his friend, but he also couldn't pretend that everything was okay. The time had come for him to leave. That evening, Emeka stood at the door, suitcase in hand, ready to head back to his own house. Chijioke was sitting in the living room, his eyes tired and distant. Emeka, you don't have to leave yet. We could talk some more, Chijioke said, his voice thick with the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. Emeka gave him a long look, his face hard to read. I think you need some time alone, Chijioke. I've said everything I needed to say. You know what you have to do. It's up to you now. Chijioke nodded silently. He understood that Emeka had said all he could. His friend had tried to help, tried to make him see that he couldn't keep holding on to the past. But now the real work was up to him. I'll figure it out, Chijioke replied quietly, though he wasn't sure how. Emeka paused at the door, turning to look at him one last time. Don't stay stuck, Chijioke. Don't waste your life waiting for things to fix themselves. You have to take control. With that, Emeka walked out of the house, leaving Chijioke alone to face his own demons. Emeka drove through the quiet streets of the city, the darkness pressing down on him. The weight of the past few days still hung heavily on his shoulders. He had tried to help his friend, but he couldn't do the work for him. It was up to Chijioke now. As Emeka drove, his thoughts wandered. He had tried to be the strong one, the one to give advice, but deep down, he knew he had his own issues to deal with. He had always been the one to offer a helping hand, but now he wondered if he was just running from his own problems. His house came into view and he parked in front. The lights were on and he could hear the faint sound of voices inside. He got out of the car, locking it behind him, and walked up to the door. In the parking lot, in the front seat of a car parked under the dim light, he saw Aoife, his wife, and with her, a man, someone Emeka recognized as a fellow tenant, Ugo, a quiet man who lived a few doors down. His stomach sank as he saw Aoife's body pressed against his. The sight of them in the car, locked in a passionate embrace, was enough to make Emeka's chest tighten with pain. His wife was cheating on him again. He couldn't breathe. Everything felt like it was closing in on him. He quickly went inside his car, parked it at a distance, trying to stay out of sight as he watched the scene. Emeka's hands were shaking as he sat in his car, watching his wife through the windshield of the other car. Emeka walked into the house, his heart heavy with the weight of the betrayal. As soon as he stepped through the door, his emotions exploded. The tears he had been holding back finally broke free, and he sank to the couch, his body trembling as he sobbed uncontrollably. The door creaked behind him and Aoife stepped in. When she saw him crying, her eyes widened with shock and concern.
Emeka,
She whispered, rushing to him. Please let me explain. Emeka wiped his face, trying to compose himself, but the pain was too much. Explain?
how can you explain this? His voice cracked as he looked up at her. How can you explain what I saw?
I saw you with Ugo, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it? Effie's face turned pale, and she knelt beside him. Emeka, please, I'm so sorry.
I didn't mean to hurt you.
Emeka shook his head, his voice shaky but filled with anger. How could you do this to me? With the landlord, the pastor, your boss, my boss, the Uber driver, now our co-tenant, with so many people. How many more, Aoife?
I didn't know what else to do.
Aoife said softly, tears in her eyes. I felt so alone. You were always busy. I didn't mean to betray you. It just happened. Emeka stared at her in disbelief, his heart aching. You didn't mean to? You think I wouldn't find out? That this would stay hidden forever? Aoife's hands trembled as she grasped his arm. Please, Emeka, I love you. I promise I won't do it again. I swear. Emeka looked at her for a long moment, his heart torn between the pain and the history they had shared. He had forgiven her so many times before, but this felt different.
That's what you always say, Aoife, you promise.
And then you do it again. He paused, his voice breaking. But I'll forgive you. This time I'll forgive you. Because maybe that's all I know how to do. But don't ever do this again. Don't ever think I won't find out. Aoife nodded, wiping her tears. I promise, Emeka, I'll never betray you again. I swear. He knew she would still do it again. Emeka didn't answer. He just stood up slowly, his heart still in pieces, and walked out of the room.
He needed space to think.
The next day, Emeka sat alone in the living room, deep in thought. He thought back to the conversation he had with Chijioke just a few days earlier. He realized it was the pain he felt that made him advise his friend like that. If Chijioke had taken that advice, he would be in jail right now. He would have lost everything. Emeka couldn't help but think about how dangerous that advice had been. He understood that sometimes the advice we get from others isn't as clear-cut as it seems. People, even friends, have their own struggles. They might not always see things clearly, and what seems like good advice might actually be a trap. He advised Chijioke out of the pain he felt. Moral lessons. Be careful who you listen to. People might not always have your best interests at heart. You don't know what someone is going through. Sometimes their advice comes from their own pain. Trust is hard to rebuild. Once broken, it's not easy to repair, no matter how many promises are made. Please subscribe and make sure to click on the notification button to know when we upload a new video. Also like, share, and comment your thoughts. Thanks for watching. The end.